Tahmina, welcome to Podcastina.
Well, Galena, I'm so honored and grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, I was so excited when I was able to get you, and I know you're so busy, so I really appreciate you talking to me today. And I wanted to start with letting the audience know that you are an immigration attorney. So your schedule just must be crazy these days.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. It was crazy before. It's just a little crazier at the moment.
Absolutely. So I'd love to get into what has changed with immigration law under this administration.
So much, so much. And this particular administration is a very different kind of administration than the one that we saw in 2017 and 2020. It is very fast paced in the way that they are keeping us on our toes, and I think that's by design. They are also testing various different unprecedented policies that we really haven't seen before. I'm now realizing I sound like somebody else when I say we haven't really seen it before, but we really haven't. And it's really trickled from different categories. All the categories of immigrants are actually affected, but it's affecting every agency that you know of, even Department of Education and Department of Labor. And all of these things actually have an interconnected effect on immigration. So agencies didn't speak to each other before, now they do. That has an implication. Uh, everything has changed, I'd say.
How do you keep up? Is there like a company newsletter, or what's the process for staying on top of all of these new laws and regulations as they roll out? Because I've thought of that before. Like, how can an attorney keep up at this breakneck speed at which we're moving?
Well, Galena, I so appreciate this question because I don't know if many people have really asked me this question in the past. It's really, really important to be part of the American Immigration Lawyers Association if you are an immigration attorney. And the reason is that they compile all the news um, in all the different categories every day. And there are groups and committees and listservs, task forces, um, any support that you need to practice immigration law, it's there. But in addition to that, the American Immigration Lawyers Association is an advocacy organization too. So if there are policies that are harming our clients and community, we all come together. So as a lawyer, I'm not only practicing law, I'm an advocate for better laws, but I can't do that as an individual. So these organizations that come together and advocate for the same thing, Ayla is one of them. So that's where I get my primary news. I also get them from different listservs, different groups. I have various little subgroups and friend groups. It's all encompassing. You really can't rely on one source, it has to come from all different angles.
Of course, and what a blessing that there's an organization like that. When I'm not podcasting, I'm a notary, and we have a like National Notary Association, and so I hadn't thought of that in the context that attorneys would also have a greater organization. But when you explain it, it makes a lot of sense. Knowing that, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the most common misconceptions that you're hearing about immigration law?
Oh, so let's start with the taking our jobs away. I think that has been an age old misconception that they're taking our jobs away. Yet, wherever you go, whether it's the grocery store, whether it's a hospital, whether medical personnel, whether it's actually just a story from earlier today, uh, the you've heard of alligator Alcatraz?
I wish I hadn't, but I have.
Yes. One of the lawyers in one of the groups had just gone to visit, and this lawyer came back and gave a recount of what they saw. And they said that the nurse is an immigrant, all the guards are immigrants. Um, you know, immigrants are the fabric of our society. Yet the common misconception that is being used over and over again in every context is that taking our jobs away. And so I think if anybody's listening, I would challenge them to go in their daily work, whatever they're doing in their daily life, and keep a score of wherever they're getting services and who is providing that service. So I would say that is the most common misconception, and probably the most dangerous one that is being used right this minute.
I'm so happy that you highlighted that, because I think a lot of the rhetoric that I hear is immigrants, maybe even illegal immigrants, that you're going to see them in these labor intensive, physically demanding farming jobs. Much of the time, they're not paying what they should be, and that they're jobs that, the cliche is Americans don't want to do them. And without these jobs, I mean, our food industry would collapse, the economy in general would collapse. And so it's hard to ream what the perceived negativity is of people who are against it. And I would love to see, I don't know if you do know about this, because this is like now a statistics question, but I would love to see the person making the argument that immigrants are taking our jobs. Could there be like a chart somewhere that exists that is unemployment actually going down if we're locking down on immigration? Because I feel like intuitively it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. You're completely right. If anything, there are many, almost daily at the moment, different organizations are projecting job losses and open positions that businesses cannot fill, and so those are absolutely happening. What occurred to me to share with you is that a lot of farm owners people who are in red districts, people who really should be speaking up about what's happening to their businesses. I remember several years ago when I went to a conference and immigration reform was at the forefront of Congress and their activities and the actions they were taking. And there were some Republican farm owners who basically came out and said, I can't find workers to do this job. And
Mm-hmm.
they often will recount stories of they found an American worker. This happens in the construction industry too. And I'll share a story that somebody from the construction industry shared. But the farm owners were like, they don't show up. They can't do the work. They can't do the heavy lifting, the manual labor that's necessary. And often the quote unquote American worker thinks that this is beneath them. So they don't want to do it. And even if you pay them more money, they simply don't want to do it. So, what is the actual wage that is acceptable so that the business doesn't collapse, the apples in the grocery store remain affordable? It's a circular issue. um, and so that's one story to share, that farm owners, I think, at this point have to speak up, and I think they did earlier this year when tariffs were affecting them. But I think they need to speak up for just having the workers that they need. And in that context, actually, before I tell you what I think that could be a solution for, a construction owner, a construction firm owner, this woman several years ago called me and said, I went to Jamaica and there was this guy I really want to sponsor. And she went on and on about all of his skills. That this is a random person she met, but she was so inspired and impressed by his skills. And she said, I can't find people in America. And she said, I have tried to hire all different people. And yes, I have tried to hire the quote unquote American worker, but they don't even know which is the right side of a hammer. How can I actually send them to do, labor intensive, dangerous work? And that's the state of the workers that we have in the US. But that's just one example of one industry. It actually is a problem up and down every industry. And so when you hear that they're taking our jobs away, what jobs are they taking away? Are they taking the ones in the farms? Are they taking the ones away from the hospital where the doctors are treating us? Are they taking away the jobs from the, information technology companies? And that is a current argument, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But at any given time, there have always been um, hundreds of thousands of openings at companies. And what they say over and over again is that the population that they need to do this work are not necessarily getting educated in the fields that they need. And so now, right now, we're in an AI revolution. But before AI and OpenAI made it like so visible to us, it was the people who were doing deep tech work, or the computer science and technology work. And a lot of these people are from China, India, um, Venezuela, different types of countries where mathematics and science has an emphasis on the foundation of their education. So they come here and take those master's degrees and PhDs. I have a client who will only hire PhD graduates because that's the type of work they do. They do very deep research. And he says, I can't find workers. I have to hire graduates who need sponsorship because we're not getting applications from people who are American workers to do this. So, which industry are we talking about where they're taking our jobs away?
I'm so glad you made that distinction because I know from having different people in the medical space, doctors on this podcast and previous episodes, we are lacking doctors. We are lacking nurses. We are lacking people in all sorts of hospital positions up and down the chain. And that isn't one that's really discussed. And you're right, like there is an emphasis in certain cultures on mathematics and sciences, and some of it, and this isn't to like put down the intelligence of Americans, nothing like that. I think if anyone has read Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, he talks about how there's something in Chinese language that for some reason makes it easier to calculate numbers. And something as simple and as kind of innocent as a language change could instill within an entire culture an ability to just do certain things easier. And we should all be striving towards jobs that come easily to us. Like that's how we become good at them.
Absolutely. And I my accountant a couple of years ago basically said, "Oh, we can't find new accountants. That's a math-based job."
Mm-hmm.
And there is a severe lack of accountants in this country. And that's just to point out just one other industry and one other type of profession. But I come back to the question and pose it back to listeners and viewers. Which jobs are being taken away by immigrants?
So, what do you think right now? What is like your best estimate on the wait time for a visa?
Oh, that is an unfolding situation. Um, every country has its own waiting time. So, let me just go back to basics for a second. Visa is permission to come into the United States. And visa is often also confused with a green card. And so we have immigrant visas and non immigrant visas. You can apply for both of these within the United States, and you can also apply for them outside of the United States at consulates and embassies. And the timelines for each of these vary depending on the process of inside and outside the US, but also varies from consulate to consulate. Some consulates are faster, some are not. But one of the things that has happened in the last few months, which you might be aware of, is that the Department of State has just recently slashed personnel by firing federal workers. It affects immigration very directly because when the Department of State fires consular officers who are examining and deciding visa applications, they were already backlogged. Now, with fewer officers, the backlog is going to grow. Um, so that's one aspect of why we don't know how long things might take. The other change that has happened recently, and this just got announced and it's going to be implemented in September, that some visa categories, like business visitor who is coming to the US, or somebody who has a work visa and they're just renewing their visa stamp, there are categories of immigrants who don't necessarily need to be in person to show their face for an interview. And that has worked very effectively, where they have procedures to verify information, identification, paperwork, without actually clogging the system. And that's been effective and successful. But this administration has just announced that they will interview every single person. And that immediately clogs the system. So you have fewer immigration adjudicators at the consulates, and you're going to have everybody turn up at interviews. And so naturally, there's going to be an adverse effect to that. These cases also vary by the case. What type of case it is will determine how long things will take. So, one of the examples I can give you is I file a lot of investment cases when people are investing in a business to get a work permit through that. That's called an E2 visa. During COVID, it was taking months and months and months, where Canada, for example, would have taken 2 weeks at that time. Now they're taking about 3 to 4 months for that type of visa. That is easily going to become longer in how they process. But somebody who is applying for that visa typically will have to pay for the business, have the business running. And if the owner's not in the US, that directly impacts the business negatively. Um, but coming back to your question, how long does it take for a visa at the moment? It's taking longer than it was last year, but it's going to become even longer. I can't put numbers to it because we're in an unfolding situation.
Of course, and I think that actually might circle back to another misconception that we haven't gotten to yet, which is the common rhetoric of why don't people just do it the right way? Can you
Oh,
talk to me about some of the penalties of not doing it quote unquote the right way and what it looks like when people attempt to navigate that system?
I love that question, Galena. Thank you so much for helping the listener really break down some of these issues, because it is very easy to get caught up in the news and say, well, sounds easy enough. Why aren't they coming back, the right way? Because the law is so complicated, there isn't really a right way that works for families. In 1996, the Clinton administration, and there are unintended consequences from things that are actually genuinely well thought out, or at the time appeared to be well thought out.
Sure.
um, at the time, there was this issue of, let's try to make sure that workers they're working legally. So there were a lot of policies and regulations and laws around that, but they wanted to have a deterrent that if you come to the US and you leave the country, now there's a ban from coming back. That's a 1996 law, and what that did effectively trapped people in the US. Before that, people could come back, go out and come back without necessarily a penalty like this. But the penalties at the moment is that if you enter illegally, so if you crossed, the Mexican US border, it's often referred to as entry without inspection. So if you have entered without inspection, and the lawyers will roll off their tongue saying iwi. So if you entered iwi, you can't really change your status or adjust to a green card in any way. You have to leave the country and come back. But now that you've entered, and let's say you did enter legally, but then you overstayed. Now you are in the same boat. You're illegal, so to speak. No matter how you became illegal or undocumented, if you are in the US between 6 months and 12 months without status, if you leave the country, it's like turning a switch on. You are now banned for 3 years from coming back. If you've been in the US for 12 months or more without status and you leave the country, now you're banned for 10 years.
Wow.
And there are some examples of where you will be permanently banned. But let's think about the person who came here as a 6-year-old, and they didn't do it, they didn't do this on their own. They were brought here. And that person either entered illegally or came legally and became undocumented. The result is the same. But they have gone to school, they have often graduated. That's sort of a darker, avatar, if you like. And if they might get married, they might have children. They might have businesses, they might have employees. And if they leave the country, there's really no simple way to come back. Now, in addition to the fact that they may actually be banned from coming back, often there isn't a good visa category to use to come back. And so there are multiple problems that are entangled with go back and come back the right way, because the right way is not straightforward, and often the right way doesn't exist.
I'm so glad you went over that in so much detail because that is one of the talking points that people use. And another one, I think, or at least maybe a misconception that I've had that I'm willing to admit, is that I kind of thought that marriage to an American citizen was this kind of catch all umbrella that protected you from making these infractions. Is that not true?
We are in an unfolding situation on this particular category as well. Um, the two examples I gave of becoming undocumented, if you entered without status, um, and you got married to a US citizen, you still have to leave the country and come back. And, all the problems I just described will exist in that. And it's very complicated. That's why a lot of people don't leave. But the person who might have entered legally, whether it's a tourist visa, student visa, work visa, overstayed, in theory, and over the last few decades, they could essentially adjust their status. Adjust is another word to say they can get a green card if they were to marry a US citizen. Um, and in many ways, that would be the only way somebody could, quote unquote, fix their situation. However, in the last few months, but also last Friday, when I say it's evolving and it's in real time, it really is in real time.
Wow.
Um, the government has started to, the administration has started to arrest, but also put people in deportation proceedings who overstayed. And it has, they started off with people who had potentially criminal convictions. Now, I think that's a misconception that we should probably address too, but criminal convictions come in all different shapes and sizes. And traffic violations, for example, have not necessarily been something that prevents you from getting a green card. But there are some convictions that will prevent you from getting a green card for sure. But some you have to tell the government, and sometimes you can ask for forgiveness or say, yes, this was a problem, but no, it doesn't really affect getting my green card. This administration is almost making no distinction. And at many interviews over the last 6 weeks, they have arrested people who have had in the pipeline of having a green card, or they're at the interview for the green card, and they have arrested them. So that's what's happened in the very near past. But on Friday, this past Friday, which was 3 4 days ago, there was new policy saying that even if you have a green card pending, if you overstayed, we can also put you into deportation proceedings. And so this procedure that people have effectively used over the last few decades is now not going to be a safe option potentially. And we have to wait and see how this unfolds. Um, the update that came, until it actually happens to a client, we don't know how it's going to unfold. But the intention to find ways to deport more people is very much in play.
And it sounds like some of these involve taking away a couple of these avenues that would fit into the, quote unquote, do it the right way policies.
Yes,
So,
exactly. And what I will say to that is, let's say you're a US citizen and love doesn't, love has no boundaries. It's
mhm.
a soul connection. You found your soulmate. And suddenly, you have to think about whether you're going to be filing in the US or outside the US. But if we're going to be filing outside the US, we come back to your very first question: how long is it going to take? And the other thing that the government has done recently is not only do they not have enough officers and they're interviewing everybody, they're adding a gazillion different other questions. And one of them is social media vetting. And you might know this already from different visa categories of news that you have followed, but it started with anti-Semitism. We want to figure out who is talking about these issues and causing, terror. But we all know that that's not where it's going to stop, and that's not the real intention, potentially. And so that marriage case where the couple is happily in the US, soul to soul, in person, may have to be separated in the future. And whether it's an involuntary separation because they've been detained, or to avoid detention and they go back to their home country, either way they're separated. So I don't know how this is going to eventually unfold and affect people, except to say, if any of these categories are you, the listener, you cannot not speak to a lawyer, because even though us lawyers we're grappling with what is the new norm, for the layperson it is even more challenging to figure out what do we do.
Of course. And I'm glad that you mentioned the student visa situation and the combing through social media, because I actually was going to ask about that. So I saw that US consulates are digging into social media. I saw at least one news article where someone's status, I don't know if it was in jeopardy or if it was fully revoked, because he had, I think, reposted a meme of JD Vance. I think that was the article. Is there any kind of legal recourse to fight that if that happens for student visas?
you know um, it's going to be difficult to figure out all of these ways to fix an arbitrary decision.
Mhm.
It's very, very arbitrary. And when a consulate denies a case, there's no real judicial review to that. Generally speaking, maybe lawyers might start suing on that particular issue, on arbitrary, results. And I'm so glad you gave that example, because the social media vetting, again, was supposed to be, are you speaking, for or against Palestine? That's how it all started. But look where it has ended up
Yeah.
today. And there are many news stories at this point, but one of them was a student, an international student, who went for a visa stamping or visa application at the consulate, had given diligently all of their social media accounts, but they were denied based on the fact they did not reveal, and there was a gotcha moment, I think the consulate thought. They didn't give their Reddit, the news
Oh,
website's login. And to me, Reddit is a news publication place, not social media. But apparently, this administration thinks Reddit, because of the forum, maybe. I mean, I'm trying to guess why. They think it's a social media account. So it's interesting, because we don't even know where it all ends, or what the descriptions are, what the definitions are. Us lay people in that sphere think it's one thing, but immigration officers think it's another. So I think the challenges are going to continue. But I want to take this opportunity to, and you were probably going to ask this, is what really happened to students?
yes.
Students were actually one of the safer categories of immigrants in this country. When you heard the immigrant rhetoric, it would typically be about the undocumented folks or the people on the farm. Occasionally you would hear about the H-1B workers, but not necessarily about the students. In March this year, a lot of students woke up to find that they had no status. Their immigration status was terminated. And they didn't even know it for several days, because the staff at the school were not aware. It was accidentally understood and found out that they were terminated. And just to go behind the scenes for a minute, there is a database called SEVIS, SEVIS. I honestly always forget the actual terminology for it, Student Exchange Visitor. I forget what it's called. Just
Mhm.
know that there's an international student database. And that database is typically handled by the university staff. So there are designated student officers, and they are called that, DSOs, and they have the authority to go in the system and update and close and terminate or enroll or whatever. They have complete control over it. But the immigration system, ICE, so Department of Homeland Security has three components, and one of them is Immigration Customs Enforcement. They are the enforcement arm traditionally. They have visibility to that database. They can
Mm.
visibly see who is in status, not in status, and they can go and find the people who are not in status. And they typically wouldn't go in there to mess with the system. It was generally left to the student officers. But in March, when students woke up to find that they didn't have status, it wasn't done by the staff of the university. It was done directly by ICE. And that caught everybody by surprise. And even like, is this even legal? But of course, it's legal because they have, oversight of it, but they had never practically gone in. And so that caused a lot of confusion. And once the designated officers figured out, well, I need to start keeping an eye on this, they started to look every morning and they realized, 10 more students are not in status. They've been terminated. And what really happened was that, and it's thought that there was AI involved, that the criminal database, a different database completely, they matched the names in the SEVIS database to the criminal database and saw where the names were matching. And they were basically saying, you have a criminal issue, therefore we're terminating your status. We don't want criminals in this country. But that database is not a simple one either. It doesn't necessarily say, well, you had a felony and you had a traffic infraction. Everybody's in it. And if you're a victim of a crime, your name is also in it because you communicated with the police.
Oh no.
So a lot of people who were terminated actually had no conviction whatsoever. And so it was a huge palaver. And I I am now part of one of the task forces for the AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association. And it's been absolutely heartwarming to see lawyers just step up and do unprecedented things to fight back. And it is ongoing. The majority of the problems have died down because lawyers sued for the arbitrary work that they were doing. And again, remember I said there are degrees of crimes,
Mhm.
and the degrees of crimes can determine whether you stay or go. A lot of people who even had some sort of issue were not removable issues. It's either a traffic violation or something that's a minor misdemeanor. One example is that two friends fought after having a beer or something. It wasn't a violent, malicious assault. Nevertheless, when the police came to break them up, they both had assaults. But that's not the criminal that you're necessarily thinking about. Um, and so the student visa has been one of the most important or um, sensitive issues. Everything is sensitive. I mean, you can't even
Mhm.
say this is more important than the other, but it was the one that actually caught us by surprise, sort of like the travel ban caught us by surprise because we didn't see it coming. And it is ongoing. While a lot of people have been reinstated, like their status was given back to them, a lot of people were actually affected. They either left the country, they were deported, or they were terminated while outside the US, so they couldn't come back. It's been interesting. And it's not gone away. Cases are still going on for some of those. But as that happens, the administration continues to find ways to bring obstacles to student visa processing. They're, they are working on regulation to cut down the time that students can stay in the US. And for your listeners, to clarify, when an international student comes to the US, they are given what's called duration of stay,
Hmm.
meaning that you can be here for as long as you're doing what you promise, which is studying. And so often people will do come for high school or bachelor's degrees, and then they'll go on to do masters and PhD programs, and they will also get permission to train, learn the skill, hands-on training, and that's done under a program called optional practical training, OPT. Anybody who graduates in the US will get 12 months, and people with a STEM degree will get an additional 24 months. So there have been lawsuits over the years to say these OPT programs, surprise, surprise, are taking jobs away. And that has been an ongoing argument. And it's possible that this administration could succeed in curtailing all of that. So I don't know why the student visas are particularly being, targeted, but really student visas are a gateway to different types of visas. And if you can start putting obstacles there, all the other ones will have those as well. So it's an ongoing problem. And the new problem that we've seen since you and I last spoke is that optional practical training, once you graduate, you have to apply for a work permit. The work permit, for those who don't know, looks like a little driver's license size. It's like a credit card size, but sort of like a driver's license. It has a picture on the front, and it has your date of birth and your alien number. Anybody who's a non-immigrant getting a work visa will have an alien number. You can think about Sting's song, I'm an alien in New York. Um, and it will have when does that work permission begin and when does it end. And up until now, the eligibility wasn't a question. You apply and it would be processed and you'd get it back. But just recently, in the last 2 3 weeks, its time is a blur, uh, students have started to see letters from the USCIS saying, well, you got a traffic violation, therefore we're not going to give you your work permit, prove that you're eligible. And that is unprecedented, because that traffic violation has again degrees of criminal activity. It's not even a crime, it's a civil, an infraction.
Hmm.
They're trying to use that not to give work permits. So the student visa, it might be that you and I have to talk again at some point, because it's really an ongoing battle, and it's not just from one angle. Student visas are being attacked by attacking institutions as well. And you may know this, and your listeners might have heard the news about Columbia University and Harvard University being attacked and questioned. It's a way to cut everything from the foundation. And it is an ongoing discussion, battle, arguments, policies, and we'll have to see where it goes.
I think my audience is probably smart enough to come to this realization on their own, but the reason that the student thing is particularly infuriating, honestly, is because aren't they applying to college, these universities, on the same merits that the local students are? Don't we want the bar set? It's not like they're getting in just because they're coming in from a different country. They're still having to meet the requirements set by the school.
Absolutely. They are. They have to. And one of the requirements, let's say you're going to do a master's degree, you have to show you have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree, equivalent of a US bachelor's degree. And we, as lawyers, have to use that equivalency as part of our documentation to say they have the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree, which will dovetail us into an H-1B discussion in a moment. But the other thing that, whether it's evident or not to people, is that the international students actually pay an international tuition, which is
Ooh,
significantly higher than a local student. And what people may or may not realize is that those international dollars are subsidizing the cost for the American student.
wow. Mic
And
drop.
yeah, And it's really going to affect education in a very, very profound way. And we may not even feel it this September. I mean, I think we will feel it this September, but we may or may not. But just in case we don't, we will feel it next year and the year after and the year after. But think about a circular economy. The people who are graduating are part of our workforce. So we come back to your very first question about misconception. We don't have enough workers. We're not going to have enough workers immediately, but we will not have workers in the future as well. And so I don't know what the future looks like. It will be very interesting to see the projections. And you mentioned the word statistic. Maybe you bring some statisticians in and talk about, jobs. What is it going to look like if you read the statistics from, blue organizations, and what are the jobs going to look like if you look at statistics from the red organizations? Bring in an objective statistician who can look at these two things and maybe even pit them against an economist and see
Hmm.
what happens. Like, what we are going to see in the next 10 years and generation is unfolding right now. And I don't know if it looks good.
It's very worrisome, and I think you predicted where my questions were going perfectly, which is that I would love to get into the discussion around the H-1B visas, why, or cards status. Correct me, because I don't know the exact name of it, but why would we not want that? Don't we want skilled workers here, living here, buying a house, renting an apartment, contributing to the economy? Once again, taking these jobs that clearly they must be qualified to take, otherwise that particular status wouldn't have been issued in the first place.
Absolutely. And before I answer that question, I think it's notable that when the students come into the United States, there are many, many reports about their contribution too, because they need to rent apartments, they need to buy
Mm-hmm.
groceries, they need an accountant, they need a doctor, they need the various services, and they're paying for it. Nobody's subsidizing them. They're not only paying higher tuitions at schools, but they're also actively contributing to our economy. And I might not be getting this accurate, but it's something like $43 billion of contribution that comes from international students. And then think about, if you're a landlord, if you're a listener and you're a landlord, if you're a listener and you have a business where, it may be a dry cleaning business, maybe you're a service provider in whatever, I don't know. You want the consumers. They're not only contributing in different ways, they're consumers. And so take that picture of student visas who are consumers, and now double that with the various work visas. And H-1B is the most popular work visa, but there are other work visas too. And people don't not necessarily know about them as much, because the H-1B visa is often used as the black sheep of the family. They're taking our jobs away. And it's used most as, because it's a professional high skilled requirement. It's called a specialty occupation visa. And the minimum requirement is having a bachelor's degree. So we come back to this question of whose job are they taking, when most graduates in this country are often international students. And so if you think about the hospitals where they need doctors or architects, H-1B visas are not industry specific. They are industry agnostic. They are geographically agnostic. And so as long as the profession, the job requires a bachelor's degree, you can do this. So my clients are in all industries. Now, IT is something that comes to mind for everybody. It's visible, but you're not necessarily always thinking about the teacher and the doctor and the architect, and so many different types of jobs out there that require a degree. And there are 65,000 that are given out each year for people with a bachelor's degree.
That's it. That's so
And
small.
that's small. And then 20,000 is reserved for people who have a master's degree from a US school. And so this lottery happens once a year. And more often than not, there are 3 or 4 times more than those numbers who are applying. But the application is not coming from the individual student or worker, it is coming from the businesses.
Mm.
And the businesses file for these, they go through the effort of filing these because they need the help. A business would not be forking out a lot of money if they didn't need the help. And so that has been an age old issue that we don't have enough numbers. So we need to increase those numbers. But two trending problems to share with you. And this all is from the last 2, 3 weeks. There have been a lot of layoffs recently. Your listeners might know, like the big companies, Microsoft, Google, they're laying people off, and the common theory is AI is affecting the restructuring. So all these people who created those AI solutions are now, rendering themselves out of a job, and these big companies do their restructuring are just laying people off. And, this is not a new problem necessarily. We saw it in 2022, although at that time, I don't know if OpenAI was really out there yet. So us lay people didn't necessarily understand the breadth of the impact. So 2022 was a COVID, response, I think, because I think at the time the narrative was, or the reports would say, COVID needed a lot of like remote workers, as well as giving virtual services to consumers, so they hired a lot. But then people went back to work and you didn't need as many people, so they were laying people off. I think that was the general rhetoric of why they were laying people off. So that was 2022, which continued in 2023. But in the meantime, AI has come along, and just this year, so many thousands and thousands of people have been laid off. But the comfort that we had, not comfort, but some sort of safety net, was that laid off work visa holders could get, and still can get, 60 days of grace period. It's through regulation that you would have 60 days to either find another job, and the Biden administration did a really a good job in sort of clarifying the rules, reading through every regulation and clarifying it for the layperson. And I was very privileged to work with some White House officials and on those policies. So they were 60 days, and people thought they had them. The employers thought they had them. But in the last 2, 3 weeks, what we have seen and heard is that the moment the employer notifies the immigration office that this person is not working here anymore, the immigration service is immediately putting them into deportation proceedings. And that is unprecedented. We have never seen that before. And we actually don't even know how it's going to unfold, because once you're in the deportation machine, it's sort of like a current. You have to keep going with it. And the process is opaque, it's challenging, it's difficult, it's time consuming. And just like I said, that there were federal firings of Department of State workers, there have been a lot of public firings of immigration judges. And so if you are now putting people into deportation proceedings, you have fewer judges to deal with an already very, very backlogged system. And procedurally, once you're in those removal proceedings, and this is all fresh, so I don't really know how this is going to unfold. How are we going to get new H-1Bs approved? We have to go to court to close them. I just don't know. So right now, I'm working with my clients to really turbocharge all of the steps they need to take to file new cases. But this is the other problem, that if, let's take an IT person as an example, that person would typically get laid off from Microsoft, and then they would go to Amazon, or they'd go to Facebook, or they'd go to Google, these big companies. But all of the companies are having hiring freezes or not hiring that many people. So the majority of people who are dealing with layoffs, they're laid off themselves, they've got family members and kids and school and mortgage or whatever. they now have this enormous stress of like, what am I going to do before my employer notifies the government? And so my suggestion to everybody is to think about your own startup. So that's what I'm helping my clients with, having their startups sponsor their visas. And it's not quick or easy. And wherever we can save some time with doing that, it's unfolding in real time,
Hmm.
Galina. I don't know how this is going to unfold, but we're trying our best to really, really speed file these cases. But that's the thing that you need to know, is that it's an unprecedented situation where this administration is taking category by category by category to put them into deportation. And in my mind's eye, I sort of see this picture of detention being a sort of like a wheel, and the center is the detention, and every spoke is a different type of visa category, and they're all leading there. And so H-1B visas are also going to have procedural changes, regulatory changes that the government wants to say in the lottery. I just mentioned the lottery of bachelors and masters. They don't want that anymore. They say that we want the lottery to be based on wages. If you're the higher the wage, the better chance of being selected. But if you think about the graduate who's just coming out, they don't have the experience to get a high wage. But the government is basically saying you're not hiring American workers in favor of the lower the lower wage people. And so this is news from the last 48 hours. We'll see what happens with that. But everything is unfolding and changing. So, your question that you started with, what's changed? Everything is changing, and many things have changed.
It'll take time for us to see the snowball effects of all of this, but it's gonna, as you said at the top of the episode, this encompasses everything. This is not just an immigration issue. This is a greater economic and historical and societal issue. It's going to affect everyone in different ways that we can't even predict yet. Just to stay on the employment thing, because I think some people might have curiosities about this one, what's the deal with the Einstein visa? Is that under all of the same kinds of speculation and difficulties that are going on with the regular H-1B? Because I've seen that that's what Melania's status originally was, and people were kind of poking fun at that. So I just wanted to clear the air on the Einstein visa.
I love it. Thank you. It's a really great question. And in fact, today I had a startling piece of a startling letter to review, in which you can see how the administration is nitpicking everything and pulling everything apart to say, we don't buy it. You're not an Einstein. But going back to basics, the Einstein visa, which is lovingly referred to, is actually called an O visa. And the O visa has 8 requirements. You won an award? Have you written scholarly articles? Have people written about you? Do you get a high salary compared to other people? There are 8 requirements, and if you can meet 3 of them, you can generally be approved. And it's industry agnostic again, and it applies to everybody. Oh, very important thing to mention, this happened yesterday. Again, time is a blur, but O visa is used for athletes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just yesterday, USCIS basically said transgender people will not be able to use the O visa in the same way that they have been in the past. I haven't read the full policy, but essentially it's going to affect transgender athletes. And that just came out yesterday. And so, again, news in real time. And I'm so glad you asked the question of how do you even keep up? It's these
Mm-hmm.
organizations are giving us like this is a heads up of what's happening. But what's happening with that is that in the last 2 years, a lot of people did get O visas successfully. And one of the reasons people apply for it is there's no lottery. There's no timeline. You can file any time in the year, and there's no quota. There are not like only 100,000 a year. You can file for as many as you want. Um, and there are achievements. If you can show those achievements, that you don't have to be an Einstein, but if you've made sufficient achievements, you can get those. But what we are starting to see is nitpicking in a way that again we haven't seen before. And so I think with time, as they restrict the student visas, as they find restrictions on H-1Bs, they're going to restrict O. It's almost like a narrowing in on visas in general, and how people will be able to tend to the various industries. The O visas are used in the entertainment industry a lot, not necessarily H-1Bs. O visas used in the athletics industry, the sports industry, and it's used for entrepreneurs and business as well. But I have clients on O's who are in the arts. They are ballet dancers, ballet teachers. Whether you think about sports in different types of sports, wrestling, gymnastics, ice skating, you name it, things that you don't necessarily think about. The O visa is a very, very important visa category for our economy. But I think it is starting to face a lot of challenges, and it will unfold with time.
I'm so glad you cleared that up. I know someone who is a comedian who that was the path that he took, and it has now something that's going on with it, and it's murky, and I don't know the details, so I don't want to misspeak on it. But he had issues with setting up a tour outside the country because he didn't want to like ruffle feathers or get into anything that might jeopardize that. So it's impacting people directly in my life, as I'm sure if everyone took the time to look in their community and talk to people around them, they would find somebody that's impacted by this.
For sure. And John Oliver talks about his immigration journey frequently. And he had a no visa and a green card and a citizenship. And I think the latest one actually had pictures of him getting citizenship. But he talks about that extensively. And it's so refreshing to see somebody on television in his stature to actually say how challenging it is, even for somebody like him. It's not like you're on John Oliver and it's a piece of cake. It's not. You have to prove with every single document that you have achieved those things that you are claiming, and the immigration officer has to buy it. So I think this is a watch this space situation about the how it's going to start constricting.
Of course. Well, we definitely will have to circle back and have another conversation. But Tahmina Watson, please tell people how they can find more, learn more about you and what you're doing, plug anything you'd like.
Well, thank you so much, Galina, for having me. I do want to end with a positive note of, we're all human. No matter what side of the fence you're on, ultimately we're all human. We're here to serve, to love, to be loved. And love should really be reflected in everything we do, our policies, our laws, our interactions with people. And I think we've moved away from that, and we've got to come back to center about what our values are. um, but it's difficult to do that with so much noise. And so my request to any individual listening to this, and then please share it so there's a ripple effect, is focus on your soul and your own happiness. Because if you can be in a joyful state, love will actually grow. That's where love is. And where there is love, there isn't hate. Hate cannot stay there. So if we can figure out how we can ignite love or reignite love and joy in each individual, collectively, that energy will come up and hopefully be part of our solution. And so I have embraced that quite literally. And I do bird photography in my spare time. And it is a mindful activity. It takes me out of the zone of like being stressed and nervous for every single case, every single client, every single policy. And I have recently been creating coloring books from my photography. And so just today I launched a third coloring book. So thank you so much for saying I can plug it. It's called Color Your Joy. And so in addition to several immigration law books, so if you're an immigrant, a founder, or anybody who wants a work visa, read my startup visa book. But everybody who's looking for a moment of stillness, looking for a bit of calmness, sort of wants to get away from the stress and the noise of the news, I would love for you to check out my coloring books. They're called Color Your Joy. And I'm so proud of them. And a big shout out to my sister, Tamana Jahan. She is a filmmaker and a creative who is a co creator of all of these books. And so people can find me on my website, watsonimmigrationlaw.com, or my author website, which is tahminawatson.com. But I love connecting with people. Find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can't not find me if you Google my name.
Amazing. And I will plug links to all of that. What a beautiful way to wrap up the episode. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye.
Bye.